Schooling, education, teachers. In this day and age, when it's mandatory for kids to go to school and transportation is more efficient, it could seem as though our education could be taken for granted. Sure, we like it when our kids do well in school and rejoice when the report card has A's on it, but there was once a time, not so long ago, that the idea of school may have been perhaps just a little more appreciated. These were the days when parents sent their child or children to school by choice, because other parents could and did keep their children at home to work around the house or on the farm. And the kids who did go to school bared the cold and hot conditions of the day to be in a classroom shared by kids much older or much younger than themselves. These were the days of the rural schools. According to the May 23, 1957 edition of the Kentucky Standard, the days of the rural one-room and two-room schoolhouses in Nelson County were ending. The Nelson County Board of Education sold the last 4 buildings of Balltown, Culvertown, Sutherland, and Winsted schools. They all saw their last class in that year with the exception of Culvertown School, which was sold to the Roman Catholic Archbishop of Louisville and ran as a parochial school until 1969. The nuns from the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth who taught at the schools closing would now staff the new St. Thomas School. And the students would either be going across the Beech Fork River north to Old Kentucky Homeschool or go south to New Haven. But the closing of those schools meant more. They were the last of many rural schoolhouses in Nelson County. So we at PLG wanted to take a look back to those 4 schools and beyond to perhaps capture the spirit of education as it used to be in Nelson County. And for the Voice of Authority, we talked with local historian Dixie Hibbs.
The history of Nelson County is completely involved in rural schools. When I say that, the first schools we had that really educated a lot of our young people were out in the country, because the whole county was the country. We had a few in the city of Bardstown, but mostly people had 3-month schools that they could go to when the weather was good, either in the summer, the fall, or the spring. Winter time, they just couldn't quite get through the snow. We talk about rural schools because that is the foundation of the education. We had private schools in Bardstown, but all through the county, Bloomfield, New Haven, Boston, Cox's Creek area, had the 1, 2, 3, or even 4-room schools. I interviewed a lady some years ago, and she went to a 1-room school. Her parents had gone there before, and she ended up teaching there in part of her teaching career. That shows you how long these schools were important to their communities. As long as they were useful, people didn't tear down these 1-room schools, they continued to use them. Now, as you know, getting to school today, a lot of students get on school buses. Well, in Nelson County, you used your feet, a horse, a wagon to get to school because we didn't have school buses. Maybe a horse with 6 or 7 students on it might be considered a school bus, but until the 1930s there was no way that was supplied for you to get to school. Education always was important enough, though, that the parents made sure the children made the effort. In the early part of 1900, there was a move to take some of the smaller schools, put them together, consolidate them. You'll still hear that term today, consolidated schools. It was more efficient. You were able to break your classes apart from having 1 to 5 or 1 to 4 and then 5 to 8 classes in the sense of the grades 5 to 8. Then having a larger school facility, rooms, you might have a place to eat lunch, a lunchroom. Even up into the 1950s, there were places that had no cafeterias and had no lunchrooms because they were small rural schools. The reason we're even talking about this now is the fact that in our research we discovered in the spring of 1957 the last 4 of the rural schools in Nelson County closed. These 4 would be Sutherland, Winsted, Balltown, and Culvertown. As you can tell, most of those are south of the river on the New Haven Road in that neighborhood. The way they could close, or the reason that the school board determined to close them, Bardstown had Old Kentucky Home, elementary and high school. New Haven had elementary school, and they were able to, at that point in the 50s, school buses were running up and down the road. So they could collect the students and bring them to the nearest school to them.
Genealogist Ellen Smith with the Nelson County Genealogical Roundtable says there were many schools dotting the countryside in Nelson County at the turn of the century from the 1800s into the 1900s. A few years ago, she did her own research to find out more about those schools and the children who attended them.
In the year 1896 and 97, I was able to identify 41 different schools in Nelson County. So that was pretty exciting. And they had what they call a school census in those years. And it's a list of each student in those schools. So that's a great big help for genealogists or anyone that's just really curious. Since the 1890 federal census burned up, it really helps fill a gap there.
Smith, who we spoke with at the Nelson County Public Library, said many of those schools were around 5 miles apart and had an average size of around 50 to 75 children.
Yes, that was probably grades 1 through 8. I know my mother attended the Craven schoolhouse, and she, I think, just about cried because she didn't have a way to go any further with her education because she didn't have a ride to Bardstown, and that was the nearest high school. So that was the Cedar Creek section that she grew up in, and she was Marie Downs.
According to Smith, in those days, trustees were elected to be an advocate for the school and to make sure the children were getting a proper education, and that included the job of hiring a teacher or teachers for the school.
So each school had trustees, and often the trustee would be the one who would drive around in his own car and pick the kids up and see that they got to school, the ones that were furthest away. And then the ones that were closest walked. They were staffed with a lot of women and some men. There were 2 Vidito sisters that never married, and they were school teachers all their lives.
As time passed by in the first several decades of the 1900s, the culture of some of the old country rural schools in Nelson County changed by the catalyst of growth, as populations grew in number and consolidation became inevitable in some parts of the county.
I'm going to mention Boston, a community southwest of Bardstown. In the 1922, there was an election in Boston School District. 280 people would vote on whether to consolidate 3 schools, Petersburg, Little Brick, and Boston, into one school. The other 3 schools were spread out on the 60 square mile school district. 169 voted yes and 106 voted no. A majority won, and they built an 8th grade and high school building at a cost of $5,000. So all the students that went to the other 3 schools would have one place to go. There were 200 students who were available to come to the new Boston graded and high school. Today we still have a Boston school, and it is the desire of that community to keep their Boston school. And this is what I think runs through Nelson County, their families and their students, the desire for a good education for their students, and the ability and the desire to work as hard as they can to keep them close to them.
As even more time progressed over the next few decades, consolidation became the norm as the country rural schools closed one by one in Nelson County, with the last blow as the Board of Education sold the last 4 schools in 1957. Balltown School was built in 1913. It was located on the old US 31E New Haven Road section, which is now Robert Taylor Lane. A new section of US 31E was later built behind it. The school was staffed by the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth starting in 1928. Culvertown School was built in 1927 and was actually never located on Culvertown Schoolhouse Road. The school on that road had been known as Smith's School and is no longer standing. The same fate happened coincidentally to Culvertown School, which is no more and has been replaced by the Immaculate Conception Church's Community Center. Sutherland School was erected in 1909 on Sutherland Lane, but not the Sutherland Lane that you might be familiar with. Sutherland Lane was once a loop with 2 ends connected to US 31E New Haven Road. When the Bluegrass Parkway was paved in 1965, the loop was disconnected and one side of the road stayed Sutherland Lane, and the other we now know as Quarry Lane, which is where the Sutherland School was located. The school was staffed by the Sisters starting in 1929. And the Wimsett School was built in 1912 as early schools in the Greenbrier area had burned. There is a common argument on the spelling of the schoolhouse, as class pictures have it one way and the road department has it another. But a deed from 1913 shows that Mary Ballard Wimsatt, W-I-M-S-A-T-T, sold a parcel of land to the Nelson County Board of Education for $20. So the pictures have it correct, but we doubt the road name will change anytime soon. In looking back at these four schools, we realized that 1957 was a number of years ago, but not that long ago in some respects. We wanted to talk with some people who had attended those schools and remembered their time there. Charles Roberts attended Wimsatt School in the 1930s. He later became the last Nelson County judge elected in 1974 and the first Nelson County judge executive elected in 1978. Edwin Cecil attended both the Balltown School in grades 1 through 6 and Sutherland School in the 7th and 8th grades. Many people in the community know Edwin or have at least seen his name on the back of a car or two, as he ran Edwin Cecil's auto sales successfully for many years before retiring. And Ed and Louise Nally, meanwhile, actually went to school together at Culvertown School in the 1950s. They were one grade level apart but didn't actually date until they were teenagers going to high school. They were married in 1963 and have two wonderful dogs, Gertie and Sir Winston Churchill. For a recollection of their school experiences, well, we'll just let them remember the good old days.
Well, I can remember the first day of school, and I was just terribly homesick, you might say, because I just hated to go to school. I always did, and for some reason I just wasn't very happy in school, but I got my way through it, and actually later on I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the school. I enjoyed the kids, the people, and I loved to play with them, and we had a good time.
I can see the front steps walking in the door to the grade school, to the first grade, and also in the third grade they had different rooms that you went into for the 7th, 8th, and the 1st, and the 2nd, and the 3rd, 4th, and 5th, different doors for each room. I can see every one of them as plain as day, and it's gone.
Way back in the sticks, about as far as it can go. Of course, it's built on a pasture field, and no fence and nothing around it. Cattle all around it, and you had to watch where you were stepping. You'd step in cow manure. And it had, of course, it had no electricity or water either. It had a well about 300 feet down on the hill, and they bring a bucket of water up, everybody drank out of it. They called it a dipper. And a dipper in the bucket, and you'd go drink out of the dipper. Everybody drank out of the same dipper. Some of them put their hands on the bottom of the dipper. I used to go down on the hill and get me a drink out of the pump. I didn't want to drink out of the dipper. Everybody putting their hands on it.
Of course, younger kids learned from the older kids. And so they was probably, I don't know, the first grade, we probably had 8 or 9 kids in the first grade, and I don't remember exactly how many was in the other grades, but the teachers at that time, Sister Ann Richard was a nun from St. Thomas that came to Balltown to teach, and she would have some of the older girls, mostly, when she was having classes with the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, they would be, doing our ABCs and writing and stuff like that with us. They helped out a lot. And then each year, the progression, every time that you were in a different class, you learn from the older kids in the class. If they were teaching geography or arithmetic or spelling or whatever it was, the younger kids always seemed to be, picking up off of those, classes that they had, because everybody was in there together.
The priests were so revered out where we lived, and everybody just treated them so respectfully. And when a priest would come into the school, oh my goodness, that was like Jesus was right there with us, and he would lead us in prayer and all of that. That was really important to all of us and special. And we had said the Pledge of Allegiance every morning in school, the very first thing. And
say prayers. We had a religion class.
Yeah, we had a religion class every afternoon, and the nuns were just they were just great. They were just
But
really
they were
great.
firm,
They were firm, but they were fair.
Mm-hmm.
And the superintendent, when the superintendent would come to Covertown School, that was a big day. We all had to put on our best manners and wear our best clothes, and we all had uniforms, of course, but they had to be starched and ready and really look sharp, you know. And that was a big deal because the principal would make a big deal over that. You know, we all have to put on our very best, and the priests too when they would come into the school. That was great.
Well, they had a lot of windows because they didn't have electricity, and for lights, and as on the light they had, you had to have all windows so you could see how to read and write, so forth. And they had a lot of windows in. You go to open the windows because people were tough then. They didn't know what air conditioning was, and you could take a lot of hot weather or cold weather, either one.
It was really wonderful because it was our own special little place in the area, and we were very proud of it. We didn't have to walk to school. I walked 1.5 miles to school and back every day, all through grade school. And we didn't get to ride the bus until we went to St. Catherine's High School in New Haven. But we loved Covertown School, and we were so proud of the church. The little church was just so beautiful and so special to us when we were kids. We thought that we really had something special, a little mission church. They were really good teachers. They were very good teachers. They were honest and fair, but they were they expected discipline and for you to behave and to be good.
She they found the meanest teacher they could find, I think, and she was. I wasn't but 7 years old, and I told a girl she dropped her pencil on the floor, and it was 5 words, and you got 10 licks. She'd bend your hand back like that and hit you with a wooden ruler. And after about 10 licks, I couldn't take no more. I jerked away from her and tore into her boulder her. And she used to have old sticks, you know, prop broom handles, sold having 2, prop the windows up. She broke about 7 or 8 of those on my back. I was 7-year-old old. And she'd go to penitentiary with that now. But back there then, they could beat you to death if they wanted to. She almost did me.
You know, the nuns, they had like a coal shed where they get the coal for the fires. And if you were bad, they would take you out to the coal shed and spank you because you were bad in school. So I remember that. So that's some of my memories.
I feel like that, we got a pretty decent education if you, was applied yourself at the nuns. They were pretty strict back in those days. You get that old paddle across the palm of your hand, and if you didn't toe the mark.
Well, I think it would be because I was a fidgety kid, and Danny Smith sat right beside me, and we both were short and sat in the front row. And Sister Joseph David, she was our first grade teacher, and she was a very strict old Irish nun, and she didn't like our fidgeting around and moving our feet around and all that. She tied my feet and Danny Smith's feet to the desk to make us be still.
I remember one time I got caught in a hailstorm, got about half a mile from home. Oh, I tell you, it looked like it beat us to death before we get home.
I didn't have to walk very far, about probably no more than 2 blocks. It was just very close, and of course everybody in the neighborhood, they was very, I guess Louise walked probably the furthest of any of them, because everybody else is pretty close.
It was probably, I walked about a mile to school every day. Didn't have snow days, of course. Didn't matter how much snow you had or how much ice you had, you still went to school. Mr. George L. Norris, I remember he went to St. Thomas and picked up the kids, or picked up the nuns, or nun at that particular time, and brought her to Balltown to teach. And if it got bad, ice or snow or whatever, he put chains on his old Chevy and went down, picked them up and brought them to school. So we didn't know anything about snow days or anything like that back then.
It felt a lot colder back then than it does this day in our time today. I remembered it being so cold that you just were cold to the bone. You were just cold. And now you hardly ever get that cold anymore. Of course, we have so many conveniences now, you know. But they did have the old privy there too, you know. We didn't have indoor bathrooms there at all.
And I know some of the kids that went to school with me lived over on the far end of Burba Road, which was probably a good 3 or 4 miles that some of them had to walk. So that's, you know, 3 or 4 miles in the morning, 3 or 4, you know, you've heard the old story about, you know, how deep the snow was back then. But that's true. I mean, there was a lot of days and a lot of times that I went to school. I remember one time in particular that we had an ice storm. And I know my dad took an old grass sack and cut it and put it around my shoes, and then took string and tied it around my shoes so that I could stand up on the ice. I mean, you know, that really don't sound like it's been that long ago, but it has been, really. It's been a lot longer than people think it has. Back then, the kids, you know, you got 2 recesses and a lunch hour, not a lunch hour, but half an hour for lunch, and you went outside, the kids played ball, played tag. There was, down in front of the school, there was a creek went down, it run across between the road and the schoolhouse, and it all grew up in willows and cattails and stuff like that, and the boys all went down there and catch frogs and stuff like that in the swamp down. We called it the swamp. It wasn't a swamp, but we called it that. We played marbles, shot marbles and things like that, you know, recess. And we didn't have a regular baseball bat. We had just an old flat piece of wood that was carved out with a handle on it. That's what you use for a baseball bat. A lot of people think that's kind of primitive, but back in those days, that's kind of the way it was, you know.
Yeah, the recess in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. Our school lasted from 8 in the morning till 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And you had to usually cut off half an hour for dinner and 15 minutes for each recess.
Oh yeah.
Oh
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
that was the best part of the day besides
Yeah.
lunch.
Yeah, I remember, you know, we'd play different games, you know, even the nuns would get out and get us all together, and we would play these silly games, you know, put us all together, play games like that.
Dodgeball.
Yeah, dodgeball. You know, we played a little bit of softball and stuff like that too, you know, and wrestle around with each other. Have a good time. It was good.
Carried you on lunch. You had to always have to use a blackberry jam, biscuits, blackberry on it, blackberry jam on it, and peanut butter and crackers. That was usually about it. You carried in a little bucket.
You know, when we had a cafeteria there at the school, my 2 aunts, they were the cooks, and they were great cooks. And I can remember their food just today, how good it was. I mean, they had to, you know, everything was just very well done, and they did a good job. And I can remember that very well. Well, they served, well, chili was one of the, you know, things. And they had, if I can remember right, they had like vegetables. They had, you know, it's like a plate lunch. They had, I'm sure they had like hot dogs, hamburgers, green beans, meatloaf, you know, potatoes of certain, and things like that. You know, just regular, good old country food.
Didn't like peas, and we had to eat everything that was put on our plate. I'll never forget the lady that cooked in the lunchroom. She knew I didn't like them, and she would put them on the plate, and I'd rake them off and put them in a napkin and put them in my pocket, and then when I go home I'd have a big greasy spot on my pocket. Yeah, they still had the peas, but I don't think that Sister Ann Richard was the nun at St. Thomas, and Sister Mary was the nun at Sutherland's, and I don't recall her making us eat those peas like they did like at Balltown. So I was kind of glad of that. Peas and butter beans, those were about two things I didn't like back then. I eat peas today. I mean, I'm not crazy about them, but I will eat them.
Well, you know, we had the little girly spats, but basically, yes, we all lived within a mile of each other. We were all the same age, and we saw each other every day. And yes, we spent the night with each other. Girls did. I don't know about boys, but girls did. We all took turns spending the night at each other's houses.
The kids seemed like everybody got along good back then. I mean, I don't know if we didn't have any trouble with any of the kids. It was just actually I have good memories about it. It's a good time. I mean, I look back, a lot of the kids that I went to school with, there's quite a few of them that have passed away in the last several years. And so I guess I feel fortunate to still be here, you know.
Almost anywhere, a big one-room schoolhouse and had an old pot-bellied stove under the heated with. And I remember one thing about the pot-bellied stove. Two girls, they'd never seen an automobile before in their life. They was about 8 or 9 years old. And an old coal truck come late in the evening, it was raining, they had the headlights on that old coal truck all over it. And somebody told me that's the devil. And they really thought it was the devil. They just went into fits. Seeing the coal truck, they thought it was the devil.
The fun part of it was getting to go out. The older boys always got to go out and unload the milk truck, and of course the driver, he would always give you a bottle of chocolate milk or something, you know, for helping unload the truck. And
oh yes, they had the picnic every summer. Yes. And I'll never forget one year my brother was asked to go around and take chances on a particular for the prize, you know. And these two old maids that lived kind of back in the woods, they never had married or anything. They were sisters. And anyway, he went to their house when they told him no, they weren't going to give him a quarter for those chances for that. And after the picnic was over and they had drawn the prize, this one old lady, she said to my brother, "See, I told you that I wouldn't win anyway."
This woman, a boy had been teasing their daughters, and she come out there and wanted us to go through the gate in front of her house, and she had a club, and so we went back and told her, "Oh man, this woman would let us go to school, but he had some kids too with us." And he had this old mule, he was about 6 foot tall, I think, he had a razorback mule. I was the smallest one, so he let me ride on the mule, and he chewed the gusto on her out, so he'd kill her, she would come out there again. And the old mule would lope along, and I messed my britches up. I was scared to death. And my sister had to take me back home, and I missed school after all. But she never did come out and stop us anymore.
I remember the discipline, the decency, the kindness, the sweetness, the innocence that it doesn't seem like that we have this day. For some reason, I think our TV has stolen it from our kids, that we actually had back then, when a little thing meant so much more than it seems to today.
Oh my God, they'd be so bored they wouldn't know what to do. But I think we might be better off if we had some of those days again, you know, with the problems they got in school today, discipline and all that. There was no discipline problems back then. If you got a whipping at school, you went home, you got another whipping. That's, you know, what happened then, especially if your parents heard about you getting a whipping in school.
Oh yes, we see them occasionally, especially at the St. Catherine's class reunion in New Haven. We haven't held a Culvertown class reunion, I guess, since about 1999.
Yeah, it's been a long time ago, yes.
I don't know. There's a lot of them that have gone now. And the few of us that are left, I see them occasionally in church, different places, yes.
Yes, I still see one of my best friends. He's a deacon for the St. Catherine's and Culvertown Church, and he's been a deacon a long time. He's a very good guy. I remember him very well. His name is Arnold Downs. He's a deacon, and some of the others I do see occasionally, but not too often.
They took it down.
The old schoolhouse, they tore it down, and they built a like a community center. It was a gym, where you could play basketball and stuff in it. And actually, they were going to build school rooms beside it, in front of it. But I think what happened, they either ran out of money, or the archdiocese decided not to continue having a school there. And I think that just kind of faded away. So right now in Culvertown, you still got the community center, where they have bereavements,
wedding
dinners,
receptions,
wedding receptions,
luncheons.
And they used to have bingo out there all the time. They still do, I think. They still have bingo at that place. So that's pretty much what happened to it, and the school is gone forever.
Anytime you close a school building that holds memories of the students and the parents of the students who went there, it is upsetting. But the reality of education is the more that we learn, the more we need to share with students. And in our world today, you can imagine how much further we've come from the very earliest years, when reading, writing, arithmetic were the basics and what was expected of them. If you have the opportunity, talk to your grandparents, great-grandparents if you have them, and ask them how they got to school. My mother always told a tale about riding to school on her pony. Now, her family was rich enough to have an extra pony, but she thought that was fun at the time. Today, I'm sure our students would think it was fun until they had to figure out how to water the pony and give it something to eat and clean up the manure when they got ready to go home. But the reality of getting an education, you have to put forth the effort. And in the early years, everybody put forth some effort.
With the exception of Culvertown School, all the other schools sold in 1957 remain standing to this day. Sutherland School is now a residence on Quarry Lane, and Balltown School is also a residence. The Wimsett School, however, no longer has anyone living in it. Doyle Downs owns the property and the old schoolhouse, and he keeps the building erected for storage. He keeps a good eye on it, however, as I found out by just trying to swing by and get a few pictures. But he was gracious enough to let me inside to check the place out. If we at PLG could do one of those magic video effects like on Titanic the movie, where it transforms in time and you could see it like it used to be, we would. But that feature isn't quite available with the push of a button, and we don't think we could do it justice. Those pictures are in the memory of those who attended the Wimsett School, and Balltown, Culvertown, and Sutherland schools. And with all the other schools in Nelson County which have ever closed, we're sure it is the same way. One thing for sure is that the education received in those old rural schoolhouses is the foundation which built Nelson County and the lives of our parents and grandparents, which weaves into our lives like an unseen spirit. We sometimes refer to this spirit as discipline, character, integrity, attitude, love, and things that are wholesome and good. We only hope we can carry on the torch of education and life as good as they made it out to be.